I never imagined walking into a room full of my wife's colleagues would make me feel so invisible, yet that afternoon proved otherwise. My name is Gideon Carter, I'm 39, and I've been married to Melisandra Mel Whitmore for 11 years. I've always considered myself a supportive husband, the kind of man who quietly backs his wife in her career, handles the bills without complaint, and never seeks attention for doing the things most husbands would never bother with. I believed our life was solid, balanced, and unshakable, until the day of her corporate gala. Mel was always ambitious. She climbed the corporate ladder with a determination I admired. When she got promoted to vice president of operations last year, I threw a small dinner to celebrate, just the two of us, and kept it low-key because I knew she didn't like over-the-top attention. I thought I understood the world she was moving into, a world of suits, boardrooms, and high-profile dinners. But I didn't really understand it. Not until I walked into that room. The event was at a posh hotel ballroom. Crystal chandeliers reflected off the polished floor, waiters circulated with trays of champagne, and her colleagues were dressed to impress. Mel looked radiant in a navy gown, hair perfectly styled, jewelry understated but expensive. I wore my usual suit, not flashy, clean, classic. I thought it was appropriate. Apparently, I was wrong. As soon as we entered, a few heads turned. At first, I assumed it was just a glance, casual recognition. But then the whispers started, not subtle at all. Does she have a husband? Who's that with Mel? Is that her husband? They didn't say it to me. Not directly. It was a chorus, a ripple across the room. And the way their eyes scanned me, polite curiosity mixed with obvious judgment, was worse than any insult I had ever endured. I felt exposed, like a costume I had been wearing all these years had suddenly been revealed as a cheap imitation. Mel didn't notice, or pretended not to. She held her head high, smiled at her peers, laughed at their jokes, and introduced me briefly as my husband. The words sounded hollow when they left her mouth. Hollow because nobody seemed to register me. The attention was hers, the admiration hers, the room hers. I was just there, a shadow tethered to her. We made our way to a corner, a small table with wine and hors d'oeuvres. I tried to start a conversation with Mel, talking about the office renovations she'd been managing, her new leadership initiatives, the keynote she had delivered last month. She nodded, smiled, occasionally responded, but her attention was fleeting. The moment someone else came near, she was absorbed, engaged, animated, alive. And I, standing beside her, felt irrelevant. I realized I wasn't just invisible to her colleagues. I was becoming invisible to her too. By the third glass of wine, the reality hit me hard. I'd spent over a decade being supportive, reliable, consistent. I had been her rock in financial crises, her confidant in stressful projects, her quiet cheerleader in moments of triumph. And yet, here, surrounded by the very people she wanted to impress, my presence was a novelty, almost a mistake. I thought about all the nights I stayed home while she networked late, all the times I managed household chaos so she could focus on her career, all the little sacrifices I made without complaint. And suddenly, it felt like none of it mattered. Then came the moment that broke me and clarified everything at once. One of her colleagues, a man with a perfectly trimmed beard and a tie that screamed success, approached and said, loud enough for me to hear, "Mel, I didn't know you were married." He's very quiet. Not what I expected. The words weren't mean, but the implication stung like acid. He didn't ask, he stated. My silence was noticeable, my existence irrelevant. And Mel laughed. A polite laugh, fleeting, like a balloon escaping from a child's grasp. She didn't defend me, didn't interject. She let it pass, and everyone moved on. I excused myself and stepped outside for a moment, into the cool night air. I leaned against the marble column, heart racing, mind spinning. I replayed the years in my head. Birthdays I remembered, dinners I cooked, crises I soothed, dreams I supported. And I wondered, for the first time in years, if any of it had been real to her, or if I had been invisible all along, living in a shadow that only mattered when convenient. I returned inside because I knew leaving in front of her colleagues would humiliate both of us, and I wasn't that type of man. But I stayed distant, sipping water, letting her navigate the room, the conversations, the laughter. And then it happened again. Another whisper, another glance, another judgment. This time, someone commented, "I've seen couples together for years, but he doesn't look like he belongs. Belongs. That word echoed in my head. Did I belong anywhere in her world? Was I simply a placeholder in the background of her glamorous life? By the end of the evening, I realized something fundamental. I had spent years defining myself in relation to her ambitions, her expectations, her successes. I had subordinated my presence, my worth, my identity to the backdrop of her life. And at some point, she stopped seeing me, not because I had failed, but because I allowed her to define the frame, the narrative, the spotlight. On the drive home, I didn't speak much. I let the silence stretch, heavy and reflective. I could feel her thinking I was preoccupied, that I was pondering the evening. And I was. Not about her, not about the crowd, but about me. About who I had become in my own marriage. About the quiet sacrifices that had slowly eroded my sense of self. About the invisible man I had allowed myself to be. That night, I made a decision. Not dramatic, not vengeful, just clear. I would reclaim the dignity I had unknowingly surrendered. The small, quiet assertion of my existence would begin with subtle changes, gestures, boundaries. I didn't need to confront her, or demand recognition, or prove anything to anyone. I only needed to see myself, to acknowledge the worth that had never been contingent on anyone else's approval. The following week, I started with minor adjustments. I arrived early for our own dinner. No distractions, no compromise. I didn't chase her attention, but I engaged fully with my life, my friends, my passions. And gradually, the tension I had carried, the weight of being invisible, lifted just enough to breathe. I didn't know if she noticed, or if anyone else did. It didn't matter. For the first time in a long while, I felt present, not for anyone else, but for myself. I still love Mel. I always will. But I no longer need her corporate crowd, or her fleeting glances to define who I am. And that, I finally understand, is the most empowering moment a man can have in a life he thought was shared.